So after a couple of years in which it really felt like the pace of change in the mobile game industry was slowing down, the last year has really delivered a lot of interesting news and surprises. The builder genre, or as it's sometimes called, the invest and express genre, really seems to be on life support. This is a category in the form of Farmville and Farmtown that really first put free-to-play gaming on the map as a mass-market phenomenon just 8 years ago. So when we did this talk 2 years ago, if you look at the top 25 grossing games across the three main platforms, iPhone, iPad, and Android, 9 of those top 75 games were Invest and Express games. And then a year ago, again, 9 out of those top 75 games were in the builder category. But today, just 2 out of those top 75 games, Heyday, which is at number 16 on iPad, and Township, which is barely squeaking in at number 24 on Android. So it feels like soon this genre might completely disappear from the top grossing charts. So is this the end of an era? Or is it just one of the cycles that we've seen over and over again with so many genres? So Chinese game companies have been acquiring non-Chinese game companies for years, most notably, of course, gaming giant Tencent. But now we're seeing a rash of gaming acquisitions by Chinese non-gaming companies. For example, a mining company, a poultry supplier, and just this past May, when a peroxide manufacturer paid $1 billion for the maker of My Talking Tom. However, there are signs that Chinese regulators are now cracking down on these strange marriages. So in June at WWDC, Apple announced a major redesign of the App Store for iOS 11. Apparently, it's going to have a lot more editorial content. More significantly, they're getting rid of the top charts from the public-facing section of the App Store, which is certainly going to have a major impact on how games are launched and marketed. And finally, the year has continued the requirement that all mid-core mobile titles have to be named by the same automated naming system. So these are all titles of games released in the last 18 months. But fortunately, even though the titles all sound alike, they've achieved a huge diversity with their wide range of app icons. So, for our first topic of the day, we turn to the level-based progression genre. So this is the genre that was originally defined by King Saga games like Candy Crush and Bubble Witch. And what innovation that we have seen in that formula since then has really been with tinkering with that Saga map. For example, this is Gummy Drop, where you collect building resources in the match 3 levels, and then use those resources to build buildings along the progression path. But this past year or so, we've seen some interesting innovation in the genre from a company that's located a couple of 100 miles outside Moscow called Playrix. Previously, they were mostly known for a moderately successful building game called Township. Then about 18 months ago, they ported an old web-based game called Fishdom to the mobile platforms. Features a fish tank filled with anthropomorphic fish who appear to be designed to come as close as legally possible to certain other famous fish. The levels in Fishdom are pretty standard match 3 fare. The artwork really isn't all that impressive. As is typical, if you fail the level, you lose a heart. You also get sad baby octopus. But if you win the level, in addition to unlocking the next level, you also earn some soft currency, which you can spend in the store to buy decorations for your fish tank. And as you place each decoration, you earn beauty points, which unlock power-ups that you can use in the match 3 levels. In addition, there's some light nurturing gameplay, such as feeding your fish and cleaning your tank. The fish talk to you, praising your gameplay. So Fishdom has been a pretty solid performer. It's been typically in the top 50 grossing apps across all 3 major platforms, and occasionally breaking into top 25 on iPad. And then about 11 months ago, Playrix followed up Fishdom with the release of another match 3 game called Gardenscapes. Again, Playrix has innovated on the metagame. In this case, you inherit a large estate with many formal gardens which have fallen into disrepair. As you play the levels, rather than progressing on a linear path, you're actually restoring these gardens. And as time goes by, more of your gardens look like this, but there are always still plenty in this sort of decrepit state to drive you to continue playing. The main NPC is this sort of stuffy butler character named Austin, who suggests the next logical task in fixing up your garden. These tasks appear on a mission list. Each mission has a cost, usually 1 or 2 stars, where a star is the reward for a successful completion of a level. So one sequence of missions might be to restore a treehouse, then to paint it, then to build a stream around it, and then to build a bridge across the stream. In addition to stars, completing a level also earns you some coins. And you can spend these coins within the Match 3 gameplay to buy more moves, or you can use them in the metagame to speed up build timers. The Match 3 gameplay, though it's very solid mechanically, again, it's kind of weak artistically. And this might be because Playrix originally built Gardenscapes to be a hidden object game. In fact, the game was already in soft launch when Playrix decided to do this last-minute pivot to a Match 3 game, thinking that both the Match 3 genre is easier to monetize in a free-to-play game, and also that it has much lower content creation costs compared to a hidden object game. So did that bet pay off? Yes, Gardenscapes has been performing even better than Fishdom. It's consistently been in the top 25, and it's starting to occasionally even break into the top 10. And further, from what we can derive from public records, the average revenue per player is significantly higher for these two games than they are in general for level-based progression games. So why? What explains this success? Is it the power of giving players the ability to creatively express themselves by decorating their fish tank or garden? That might be the case with Fishdom, but it's certainly not the case with Gardenscapes. Unlike classic Invest and Express games, in Gardenscapes you have almost no decorative agency. About the most choice you ever have is picking one of 3 styles of bench, or one of 3 colors for your treehouse. In fact, when it really comes down to it, your garden in Gardenscapes is just a saga map. It's expressing your progress in a new way. It's not better or worse, it's just new and different. A saga-style metagame is better at explicitly showing your progress in a discrete and understandable way. And it's also more social in that it shows your progress versus that of your friends on a single screen. Whereas a Gardenscape-style metagame is better at giving players a sense of ownership of that metagame space, and it's probably also a better vehicle for delivering narrative. And there's been an added benefit to Playrix in the success of these new Match 3 games seem to be boosting the performance of the company's venerable Township game, a game that's now almost 3 years old. You can see this rise across almost every platform, and you can see it in many different metrics. In daily revenue, both Fishdom and Township were pretty flat at about 75K per day. But now they're on an upward trend and starting to pass the 150K per day range. And in installed base, both older games were pretty flat at about 1 million installed base. And now, in the era of Gardenscapes, they're growing again. So, some lessons from these Playrix games. First, if you are building a level-based progression game, think about ways to show the player's progress in the game beyond just numbered progression along a linear path. And more generally, innovate at the metagame level when trying to enter any crowded and established genre. And then, even though this is one of the most crowded and competitive spaces in mobile gaming, the success of Playrix shows that there's room for innovation, and that innovation is going to be rewarded by the marketplace. Like humans and chimpanzees, traditional saga-style games and these new Playrix games share like 98% of their DNA. And so the innovation that Playrix did is pretty tiny, and yet they've showed that a little bit of innovation goes a long way. And finally, a hit game doesn't just contribute the revenues of that one game, but they can also have a benefit by lifting all the games in a catalog.
All right, so I'd like to talk a little bit about some interesting adventures that a pretty high-performing game has had over the last year. Talking about Clash Royale, launched last spring, March of 2016, from Supercell. For a lot of innovations in the marketplace, real-time, synchronous strategy, gameplay. And as you would expect from a game that's as innovative and polished as it is, it launched very strong, shot up immediately into top 5, top 10 territory, and stayed there. Fantastic start, but then last summer, something started to happen. The game showed a clear, steady decline in revenue. Now, these still aren't awful numbers, but I wouldn't mind having them in my pocket, but not what Clash Royale was used to. And so this led to a lot of people diving in, smart people like the deconstructor of fun, idiots like that guy, talking at last year's Casual Connect, trying to do deep dives on what had gone wrong. Why was the game starting to decline after such an awesome start? And some common threads emerged in the analysis. One issue, they'd done very little with content releases in those first few months of the game. So the game, which is PvP, is heavily dependent on its metagame, right? What you're fighting against and what you fight with. And that had become incredibly stale. Players picked the deck, adopted it, and saw the same enemy configurations over and over. In addition, like almost any game, it had a sharply accelerating progress curve. So as you got each new unit, you could level it up quickly. But after a few months, you began to feel like it was going to be weeks or months until you could upgrade the next thing. Felt like your progress had effectively come to a halt. And with the few bits of content that they did introduce, the team made some real miscues in terms of balance, created cards that were really difficult for players to counter, tended to be dominant. Sometimes when you'd see Sparky rolling along, you'd just sort of quit and go play Hearthstone. But then, in August, a miracle happened. A wizard created a fire spirit that was only supposed to burn for 1 day, but instead it lasted for 8 days and 8 nights. And also, at the same time, Clash Royale's revenue came back, strong and clear. This doesn't often happen for games. So, why did this happen? How did this happen? How did they bring it back from a clear decline? So the answer is actually pretty simple. The team made some dramatic changes in their approach to live operations, how they wanted to handle the game going forward. First, they took a badly broken tournament system and replaced it with a simple, elegant system of challenges that gave players a little bit of a different way of playing the game when their normal daily rewards had run out. And then extended that system further by introducing rule variants specifically in these challenges, leaving the core game the same, but giving really devoted players alternative skills to build up, alternative designs and tropes to learn. That made the game feel really fresh and invigorating. In the days of the decline, there was about 1 content release per quarter, and it would include a bunch of new content, a bunch of new units. So you would basically be playing the same deck over and over against the same decks for about 3 months, and then half a dozen units would drop, and you would go like, oh my God, everything I know is wrong. And then you'd figure it out in a month, and then you get bored again. Suboptimal. So they shifted that instead to a rolling pattern of releasing a single new unit roughly every 2 weeks. This meant that every 2 weeks, new decks became enabled, the metagame got shook up a little bit, you had to adapt and continuously build your deck rather than playing the same thing over and over. This drove a much higher level of engagement, much more interesting strategy in the game. Then they took that to the next level with pre-release tournaments, which they introduced about halfway through this period. So in addition to building excitement for the next release, a week before the unit came out, they would run a special tournament where you could play with that unit. And if you did well, you could be the first kid on the block to get those cards into your regular deck and start next leveling the metagame before anyone else got there. They also took their clan system, which was a significant enhancement to what they'd done in Clash of Clans or Boom Beach, right? Allowed better gifting, more communication, practice battles, and added clan chests. A lovely, simple collective achievement award for 72 hours every week. Every castle knocked down by a clan member in routine battle contributes to the level of the clan chest. And at the end, everyone who played it all gets a shared reward. It led to clans communicating, calling each other to action, getting each other engaged so that they could all get something bigger and better. In addition, they extended their old Epic Sunday feature, which originally had been just in the shop, allowing players once a week to purchase rarer cards. They extended that to allow players to gift each other rarer cards. So again, I suspect, although I don't have the stats, that their DAU spiked strongly on Sundays every week in a nice weekly cadence, so that players wouldn't miss the opportunity to buy and receive these rarer cards. And also during this period, they introduced TV Royale, a great little communication channel that updates frequently with strategy articles, hype about new units, any kind of interesting thing they want to tell you about the game, even terribly, horribly lame YouTube cartoons. Sorry if you're in the room. Towards the end of this, they put in a huge new feature. 2 versus 2 battles, where 2 players could play on each side, fight each other in real time in a little team battle. And then, in the summer, they decided that they wanted to take a little bit of a breather from this phase of release and say, well, let's take this one feature and make the summer all about this. Let's think how many different events we can create for it and make that what we do, rather than the frequent cadence of content releases that they'd been showing. And, ultimately, players didn't like this setup as well as the team. The pattern of decline seemed to resume as the frequency of feature and content releases dropped. So, what can we learn from all this? First of all, although we all know that if your game isn't fun, if it doesn't grab you, there's not going to be a ton of longevity there. Even if a game is amazing fun initially, innovative, creative, if you don't manage it well in live ops, you will lose steam as players engage with and become bored with what you have out there. But that's not an irreversible pattern. If you are in decline, think about what and how you are delivering to your players in live ops at what cadence, and you may be able to facilitate a turnaround like this. I feel that the TV Royale feature's role is a little underrated. Players know what they can see, and when you push news in their face, they know what you're doing for them. Make sure that whatever you are doing in your live ops catalog to get players excited is highly visible, is up in their face, is well announced. And, looking at the difference in the current era, where there's still interesting features, but content releases slowed down quite a bit, content is still king, particularly where content creates gameplay. Players crave new ways to play, they crave new content, so make sure even as you focus on features, you don't neglect the content that they love.
So I do have a point about mobile games. Just bear with me for the first 2 minutes. So I was having a cup of coffee with my wife, and she said, I need a new pair of my favorite bad boyfriend shoes. And I said, bad boyfriend? What do you mean with bad boyfriend? And she said, well, they are gray shoes, super comfortable, but they make me stink. And they stink my feet. And I'm like, so why do you call them bad boyfriend? Because, and she said, it's because a bad boyfriend is a guy who is a complete asshole, who never calls, but the sex is really, really, really good, so I put up with it. So, besides making me question how I treat my wife, I started thinking about this concept, right? A lot of paying for a major release. And I started thinking about examples in life that we do this. I mean, after all, there are people who go through several hours of ordeal of pain in order to look awesome, or at least think that they look awesome. And there's also people who get cramped into a plane seat for hours and no end in order to reach what they consider paradise. So this is a pattern that happens in life in several different ways. So I thought to myself, is there a bad boyfriend game? And it turns out there is. Last year, this game came out. It's called Chameleon Run. And it's an interesting game because it's very simple. You have basically a runner, a platformer, where the right side of the screen is what you tap in order to jump, and the left side of the screen is what you tap to change colors. And when you are over the platform, you have to be of the right color. Otherwise, you die. This very simple mechanic allows you to make some really great combinations. And basically, when you combine different platforms and the different paths that you can take, the game becomes very interesting. There's also double jump and other elements of gameplay that are being grabbed across the way. And granted, and I need audio for the next slide, by the way. Granted, this playthrough is really, really good. And somebody who has practiced this level multiple times, because what really happens when you play this game is something like this.
What's happened? I don't want to know. I've moved on with my life. I don't need to live in the past. Why the freak? Can we talk about the past for a second? Because I'm frustrated about it. All right, this time I got this jump. No, I don't. No! All right, we got this. Time it perfectly. Okay, we're good. What the hell do you mean? What the hell?
So, Chameleon Run is a really, really, really difficult game, right? And you would think that because it's so difficult, it wouldn't work as a mobile game. But it turns out that not only has gotten great reviews when it came out, it also was at the top grossing chart for paid games for a really long time. It's a paid game, right? Who makes money with paid games in mobile, right? Well, they did. So what really makes it work? Let's dissect it. The first thing that they did really, really, really well is that it's a non-stop adrenaline rush. So basically, there's no losing screen. Basically, every time you lose, it takes you back again to the game. So it maintains you in this flow of action and engagement with the game that never ends. And it's extremely effective. The next thing is that the choice of camera angle has been great for a runner, because this allows you to, as you play in the game and you lose, you can see farther ahead and see, oh, this is the next thing I need to do. So you're not only looking at the next jump, you're looking at 2 or 3 jumps ahead of you. And you also can see at the bottom that there's an alternative path that you can take. So this camera angle is actually very effective. And then the other thing that makes this game work really well is that the color swap, because of the fact that it's almost instantaneous that you have to do it, it's very challenging and at the same time, very frustrating, at the same time, very satisfying. So basically, when you have to play these levels for many, many, many times, but when you actually play it, the game has a feature that allows you to replay the level exactly how you played it. And this is when you see something like this, where you were actually able to overcome many, many obstacles, and you feel like a complete winner. So after playing this level maybe 150 times, you get your release, you get your final reward of being able to finish the level. So in conclusion, there's a huge misconception that casual games cannot be difficult. They can, as long as the mechanic continues to be clear and simple. And games can treat you really, really badly if the sex is really, really good. Thank you.
So the Hollywood film producer Samuel Goldwyn famously told his writers who wanted to put morals into their screenplays, if you want to send a message, use Western Union. So who knows how that quote might have turned out if Goldwyn had said it today, with today's incredible proliferation of messaging platforms. And it's not hard to see why so many companies are trying to launch messaging platforms. You don't have to look any further than Asia, where messaging platforms like Line in Japan, like KakaoTalk in Korea, or WeChat in China have become so dominant and so fully featured that they've effectively become de facto operating systems. This screen is from WeChat, and you can see that you can order takeout, you can call a taxi, you can buy movie tickets, you can even use it to make doctor's appointments. And, of course, you can use it to play games. So, in the English-speaking world, there are 2 messaging platforms that are getting into games in a big way. Apple's iMessage, and Facebook's Messenger. Other messaging platforms really haven't gotten their act together yet as far as games are concerned. So let's start by looking at the first entrant into games, iMessage. iMessage opened up to apps with the launch of the iMessage App Store last September. So the first thing you need to know about the iMessage App Store is that it's not about games, it's about sticker packs. So just look at the iMessage App Store. It's stickers, stickers, stickers everywhere. These are packs of small images, some still, some animated, some free, some paid, many using IPs, that you can download and install. Then you can choose one and append it to iMessages, just like we've been doing for years with emoticons and emojis. So look at this chart from App Figures. You can see that sticker packs make up about 80% of the top 200 grossing apps, and games as a category are a dismal and distant fifth. The other thing you need to know about iMessage apps is that discovery leaves a lot to be desired. Let's take a look at the user flow of finding an iMessage game. So here we are on the iMessage home screen. You tap this little caret, and then this icon, and then this nondescript icon. Then you tap here. At last, you're in the App Store. Now you tap the Categories button and select Games. At long last, after 6 taps, some of them pretty obscure, you're at last ready to start perusing games in the iMessage App Store. But here, even in the Games tab of the iMessage App Store, you can see that a huge percentage of the screen real estate is devoted to stickers. Let's look at the #1 game on iMessage. It's called Game Pigeon. It's a package of a lot of pretty genericized versions of tried and true parlor games: chess, checkers, Connect 4, backgammon, Boggle, Battleship. But what makes this an iMessage game? It's because the iMessage stream is used for each step of the flow. Within a message thread, you can challenge a friend to play one of these Game Pigeon minigames. The challenge includes a call to action, which takes you into Game Pigeon with the appropriate minigame selected. At the end of the play, you get a results screen with a send button, which posts your score back to the shared messaging thread. So these flows into and out of the messaging thread are really handled quite well by Game Pigeon. Now let's take a look at the other contender, Facebook Messenger. Facebook launched games in Facebook Messenger at the end of November with an offering that they call Instant Games. At launch, flow and discoverability were pretty much just as horrendous as they are in iMessage, but Facebook has been iterating the platform much more rapidly. There's now a Games Hub, which you can access by tapping this adorable little console controller-shaped icon. Unlike iMessage, there's no app store per se. There's just a curated list of several dozen games, with a few more being added each month. At the top of the Games Hub, there's a section showing the newest games. Below that is a section of games in which something has happened that requires your attention. And then below that are your most recently played games or your favorites. And then below that, not shown here, are all the other games. So these games use the Messenger channel to share high scores and leaderboards, or to notify you when it's your turn in a turn-based game like Words with Friends. So in many ways, these games are very similar to iMessage offerings. But there's one big difference, which is how you monetize an instant game. That's right. There's currently no way to make a penny on creating a game for Messenger. You can't sell in-app purchases. You can't serve ads. You can't even cross-sell into an external app and monetize that way. Facebook is promising game ads before the end of the year, but other forms of monetization simply may never happen on this platform. So let's take a look at the #1 game on Messenger, which is called Everway, which has been getting about 10 million unique players per month. The game's a classic top-down scrolling shoot-'em-up with sessions punctuated by intermittent boss fights. But there's a lot more than that to Everway. You can use coins that you earn in the core gameplay to level up your character, increasing their firepower. You can equip your character with sidekicks in order to do extra damage. There are time quests that level up your characters and your sidekicks even when you're not playing. There are group boss raids, where you and your friends together must grind away at super hard bosses, potentially over several days, in order to defeat them and earn fat loot. There are leaderboards for each group of friends that you're playing Everwing with, and events, and tournaments, and champions. All in all, just a huge amount of features for a game which, right now, cannot possibly earn a single dollar. So to recap, Imessage was the first platform to offer games, but it has poor discoverability, and most of the action is around sticker packs, not games. The leading game on the platform is a collection of classic minigames. Facebook Messenger started behind, but they're iterating more quickly. However, there's still no way to generate any revenue. And the leading game on the platform is a deeply featured shoot-'em-up. So, given all these issues around discoverability and monetization, why even bother? Well, these platforms are still in their infancy, and they're changing rapidly, so today's flaws aren't necessarily permanent ones. And remember the case of WeChat and KakaoTalk. The Asian market has predicted the North American market in so many ways. And if Western messaging platforms go in the same direction as their Asian cousins, these could be the mobile gaming platforms of the future. But most importantly, messaging platforms are inherently social platforms. You're inherently engaged in a social activity when you're in these platforms. And so games on those platforms represent our best chance to really make truly social games.
So we're going to take a look at what's been happening over the last year in mobile with Nintendo IP, which I think is a super interesting story. So for years and years and years, from about 2010 to 2014, Satoru Iwata, the former chairman of Nintendo, said unequivocally that Nintendo would never make Facebook or mobile games. That it devalued their games, it devalued their IP, and was contrary to the special and unique snowflake that was Nintendo. I can't speak for you, but this made me and Mario very sad. Because I love mobile games, I love Nintendo. In 2014, Iwata-san had a change of heart and announced a partnership with Japanese mobile powerhouse DeNA to bring Nintendo games to mobile. Over the last year, we started to see some of the first fruits of that collaboration, along with some other interesting experiments from the Pokemon company, which has started to break through. So we'll take a look at 4 big releases: Pokemon Go, Super Mario Run, Fire Emblem Heroes, and Magikarp Jump. Not necessarily in that order, which I should have thought about when I made this slide. Not to give away too much spoilers, but I will say I think Mario's a lot happier than he used to be based on the results of the last year. So let's first take a look at Pokemon Go. This released last July. It's not from Nintendo. It's licensed by the Pokemon company, who are owned about 1/3 by Nintendo. They were heavily involved in the production design, but ultimately it's a product of Niantic Corp, a Google spin-out that's focused on geogaming. And it was the first Pokemon licensed mobile game really targeted at a mass adult audience, as opposed to being focused on kids or bringing PC games over. The game has a uniquely mobile gameplay pattern. It uses a bunch of stuff you can only do in a mobile game. First, it's heavily dependent on your geolocation data, which it uses to let you hunt wandering Pokemon. It then puts you into an augmented reality game. You can see the Pokemon in front of you in the space that you're occupying and catch it in a sometimes frustrating little Pokeball flinging game. Once you've caught the Pokemon, you can train them, level them up, get them ready to fight for battles over control of Pokemon gyms littered around the landscape. It monetizes in classic free-to-play fashion, giving players a variety of permanent upgrades and consumables that they can pay real money for. Pretty sure everyone's heard about the game. It made a huge splash in the press last summer with its race to the top of the charts. Became the fastest game ever to gross $1 billion, passed Snapchat and Twitter in terms of DAU, was a huge launch. And that was really, really reflected not only in the download numbers, but also in the grossing numbers. The game came out strong, managed to monetize well on its free-to-play tropes, and despite some perception in the game development community that the game is over, remains a strong player. It's often in the top 10 grossing. The most recent release from the Pokemon Company is a new game called Magikarp Jump. I'm not sure all of you played it, so I'll walk through it really quickly. Kind of goes like this. You push a button to catch a random Magikarp, which you can, of course, upgrade if you don't like the Magikarp you got. Spend a little hard currency, upgrade him. He then goes in a pond full of fruits and vegetables that you can tap. And as you do, he gains jumping points. You can then push a button, and it will play an animation representing a random training game and give you a random amount of jumping points. Is anyone sensing a theme yet? And then you play through a single-player gauntlet of jumping contests where you push a button, and the Magikarp with more jumping points wins. Either you or the single-player NPC enemy that's been set up. You continue iterating through this minimally interactive loop until your Pokemon caps out on its level cap, and then you go back, catch a new one, and start all over. In the way of a lot of idle games on mobile, it hasn't been a star on the grossing charts. It's a difficult genre to get a high ARP now in. Monetization's been mediocre, but it is worthwhile to check out a sort of minimally interactive, highly polished idle game. Now, we'll take a look at the actual fruits of the Nintendo DNA partnership. The first of these to release was Super Mario Run. This released last December. It's a really, really smart adaptation that brings Mario to mobile in a good way. It's an endless runner. Mario's going to the right. You have one touch button to control the jumps. The playfields are well-designed and well-sized to the stripped-down mechanic. And it adds a couple of smart innovations to the platform. So there's a mode where players can compete against the ghost of the last player. If they're faster than the last player in that mode, they get rewards. Otherwise, they become saddened. It's got a light decorative metagame where you can build your own personal mushroom kingdom. And it has a very unusual approach to monetization. It's not a free-to-play game. It's a try-and-buy game in the fashion of the old sort of Windows downloads. You get the first 6 levels for free, and then you can purchase the other 21. It's a really unusual choice for a mobile game, especially a high-profile licensed title in 2016. The game had, by far and away, the biggest marketing blitz in the history of mobile. For months, the iOS App Store was running a hero banner encouraging you not even to download the game, but just to get a push notification sent to you on launch day. Nothing like this has been seen before. And as you can see, it has been a huge success in terms of generating downloads, particularly on Android, where the game has remained a fixture in the top 20 since the day it launched. It has been a solid performer on both iOS platforms. And at first, the revenue picture looked pretty bright as well, as Mario fans burned through the sample content, paid the one-time $9.99 fee, and enjoyed the rest of the game. However, and perhaps unsurprisingly, that model hasn't proved particularly sustainable. Getting a single transaction from fans is a very, very hard way to get up on the charts in mobile these days. One more game to look at, that's Fire Emblem Heroes. That launched in February, just before GDC. It's more of a niche license from Nintendo. It's from a turn-based tactical series where heroes battle on a square grid. They've made, again, some really smart adaptations for mobile, cutting down the size of the playfield, the number of units involved, to give you really fun, strategic, bite-sized battles. The core mechanic feels very fresh, but the monetization should feel very familiar. It's got every signature touch from every single DNA RPG. ranging from limited time events to big collections of heroes to level up if you played Star Wars Galaxies or Dungeon Boss, or you've seen it before. However, this combination of a niche license and proven monetization has actually worked out really well for Nintendo. This looks like a much steadier revenue contributor than Super Mario Run, despite a much smaller brand. And for the players it has attracted, it's done a spectacular job of monetizing them. According to research firm Sensor Tower, the game has done over 110 million revenue from just over 11 million downloads. That is a huge dollar per download number. So taking a step back and looking across the lineup, what can we learn from all of this? First of all, classic gaming brands have not lost their pull in mobile. If you're rolling Mario or Zelda out there, you're going to get a lot of people trying it. And this can even overcome some of the resistance we see towards really novel gameplay. No one had really seen anything like Pokemon Go at a mass market scale before it launched, but the Pokemon brand brought people in droves. Monetization trumps brand. Mario is a much, much bigger license than Fire Emblem Heroes, but Fire Emblem Heroes will easily perform it over the long term because it is smartly monetized in a way that works well for mobile gamers. And I really don't recommend doing try-and-buy games on mobile, just in case any of you are wondering if Mario can't make it, you probably can't. And as Magikarp Jump shows us, even with a strong brand, it's hard to escape some of the liabilities of the genre you may be in, particularly if they include things like low ARPDAU. And with that, over to Juan.
All right. So the last section of our presentation has I collected videos of some games that I have been fond of in the first half of the year. So, first of all, I wanted to talk about what we call casual sports. Actually, Steve, during GEC, had a section about the success of Miniclip doing Able Pool and Archery King and some games that are really trying to make casual games based on sports, which is something that, interesting enough, for years we have done sports games but in the video game industry, but we have focused on the hardcore market by making them incredibly complex. And I think there's a really interesting potential about truly making sports games for the rest of the players. First game I want to show is called Bouncy Hoops. And this game is very simple, and basically it's a one-tap game where every time you tap, the ball bounces, and when you get the ball in the basket, the new basket appears, and you have to do it before the timer runs out. It's very simple but a very addictive mechanic. The next game I want to show is Sub, and Sub is a multiplayer racing game. And the interesting thing about Sub is that instead of having precise controls, virtual joysticks, or stuff that other people have done, they have two buttons, one on the right, which gives you boosts, and the one on the left to allow you to change lanes. But the combination of these two buttons and an additional button that while you are in the air, the change lane button changes into air tricks. This combination of these three actions allow you to do all kinds of things while playing against other people. It's a very effective game, and I'm really enjoying it. Then the other category that I want to talk about is what I call the not-so-idle games, or the evolution of idle games. And during GEC, I talked about Non-Stop Night, and a game that I really enjoyed last year. And this year, a game that caught my attention is this one, Crazy Taxi Gazillionaire. And the game has not performed well financially, but interesting, I think they went onto something in the sense that they did a split screen scenario where they had a full 3D scenario where you play a game similar to Whack-A-Mole. You basically have customers popping up, and you have a fleet of taxis, and by popping on the customers, one of your taxis automatically will go pick up a customer, and there's other actions that are happening. But then you go into this other screen where you buy cabins or upgrade their how much money they make per hour, and the game is an idle game. It's making money continuously. What I really enjoy about this is this change in a scenery where you can really Instead of actually watching numbers, you do this action that takes you, distracts you for a while until you actually collect the money that you need for the next upgrade. Again, the game did not well financially, but I think we're going to see this more often, this combination of simple mechanics with idle gaming. Lastly, I wanted to talk about turn-based mechanics because there were two games that caught my attention in the past 6 months. The first one is called Charming Runes. And Charming Runes, to describe it in one sentence, it's a turn-based arcana. Basically, you have this little witch who collects pickaxes, and in each turn, you have to drag your finger to select the angle on which the pickaxes will fly towards. So every one of the bricks has a number, and that's the number of hits that it needs to get hit in order to disappear. And as you continue playing the game, it gets more complex, and you really have to strategize how to shoot the pickaxes and avoid the bricks crashing you. The next game is called Ticket to Earth, and this game is a multi-platform game. It was also released on Steam. What I really enjoy about this game is that it has a group match-based mechanic with a turn-based combat system. The interesting thing is that by selecting a bigger group of tiles in one turn, it allows you to power yourself up to get a bigger reward or a bigger hit towards an enemy. So you have to calculate not only what's your best option in terms of matching a group, but also where you're going to end up. So that way, your character, after collecting all the tiles, does the appropriate action. There are other elements of gameplay that play in these mazes as you progress through the game. So the mechanic gets deeper and deeper. I really enjoyed this game. And that's it. We are now open for questions.
Were there any common threads you saw in games that were starting to do particularly well? What I'm looking for is kind of sort of the opposite to the building games that are kind of falling out of favor. Are you finding a genre that seems to be coming in favor?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we are seeing a lot more head-to-head competition in the top charts.
Right.
Although that's a trend that's been building for a while, depending on how you think about things like Game of War.
Right.
Right, which
Sure.
are very much about PvPing.
I mean, on the casual side, a couple of years ago, there were basically three genres that totally dominated the top charts, which were level-based progression, Invest and Express, and Social Casino. And, and obviously with Invest and Express representing a lot fewer spots, I don't think Social Casino is representing more spots. I think, if anything, they've dropped a little as well. Level-based progression, probably about the same. So I would guess that, that basically the charts are more mid-core dominated now than they were at this time last year.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're also thankfully seeing more diversification over the last year. The previous couple of years seem to have been about convergence, right? So we would do these big genre charts that we would color code, and you could get the whole damn thing in 4 or 5 colors. And now, as you think about it, particularly as you dive into a taxonomy on mid-core, there's a lot more diversity at any level, whether that's the top 25 or the top 100.
So early in the talk, Steve, you talked about how a little bit of innovation goes a long way in terms of like taking a simple mechanic, but putting a nice coat of IP paint on it can help it sort of reach new heights. But later after, Dave, you talked about how Clash Royale sort of had some stagnant numbers and was reaching decline, but to me, the idea of innovation worked well for them in that they realized they needed a huge amount of innovation in coming up with a release cadence and a live ops strategy that worked well for them. But of course, as you later went on, the sort of like the summer has resulted in a bit of a decline for Clash Royale, and I'm wondering do you think it's because they slowed down their release cadence, or because players became overwhelmed with the frequency in which their metagame was being shifted every 2 weeks? Because I'm a hardcore Clash player, and like the release schedule worked great for me for a while, and then it became even though I spent a ton of money, I dropped out because I could never get comfortable in the meta. It was always being changed.
I have to agree. I mean, that's why I dropped out. Once that release cadence, became so frequent. I had invested so much time leveling up all the cards in my deck.
Yeah.
And now, every 2 weeks, one of those cards was being obsoleted.
It was either being nerfed or a new card was being released that made it less valuable.
Yeah, and that made me feel, much more like I was on a treadmill, and also made me feel like, all of my investment in the game, or a lot of it anyway, was worthless.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that there's some counterweighting there. To me, the timing of the shift lines up really well with the decline in that release cadence. It could be, I haven't looked closely enough to see how exact that comparison is. And I do think it's a game that's been around for a while at this point, right? It's almost a year and a half old. The population of players that's in is probably fairly core. So there may be more of an indication of willingness to spend in depth with that sort of relatively high cadence. The hardcore players stick around and say, great, now I've got a new thing, I've got to level it up. If I have to come out of pocket, I have to come out of pocket. But as is typical with any older game, it's going to tend toward a more hardcore pool of players.
Yeah. I think, we're going to ask one more quick follow-up. Yeah. So in games like Hearthstone, when they make balance changes or they nerf a card, they give you the ability to disenchant that for full value back, so you could build something in as replacement. But that doesn't work in a game like Clash Royale, because you have cards that you have like 50 cards total, and you're just upgrading them with thousands of other ones. How would you do something similar in a game like Clash? I think that's the problem that they have to solve.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Like, could you literally disenchant your cards for a big pile of gold? Yeah. And, I don't see any particular reason you wouldn't let people
disenchant for like a 2-for-1.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
I mean, that's the Hearthstone path when they make the balance changes. I just don't. This is when Hearthstone changes the existing stuff you have, right?
Yeah. When they change an existing card, they let you you can basically craft it or return the value for free.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to kind of media on Hearthstone, a frequent criticism is that they don't make those fine-grained adjustments often enough.
I think that's
probably in part because their refund policy. But I certainly don't think there would be anything wrong with a step-down refund policy where you're getting 20 or 25% or one-third of value in a game like Clash, and would probably keep some more community members engaged, although not necessarily your sort of whales, right? That'll keep your dolphins around.
Absolutely. Cool. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
What do you think? Why do you look at these charts, and how do you counsel developers to react to it?
Generally, my feeling about our talk is, we tried to find lessons that are applicable to a lot of different companies, whether developers or publishers, and, certainly not every genre is at all appropriate for every type of company, and not every, bit of advice that we give or lesson that we, pretend to glean is applicable to everyone. And we hope that everyone at least finds, kind of one section or one lesson here that they can apply.
Yeah, I think I certainly don't think any of us want to imply that what you should do is go out and clone all of these games. It's not a particularly interesting way to make a living, but I do think trying to understand, particularly if you're interested in playing at the top of the market, what is happening there and what the underlying dynamics are, and how you may be able to leverage them within something that's original and creative, is very much worth pursuing. If you don't learn from the past, you're just raising your risk profile very, very high.
I think your last section shows, a lot about how innovation can lead to, at least market success, within parameters that are fine for small indie companies.
I mean, there's, I think 9 years ago at Casual Connect, I did a talk about what's incremental innovation versus radical innovation. So you can find it in the archives. And pretty much almost everything I said in that talk, I still sustain. There's ways that you can make incremental innovation and still be innovative in the market, and there's risks that you're going to take to be a radical innovator. Those might pay off as well as might not pay off. I think as a studio, you need to be doing both. So obviously your financial investment in each one might need to vary, but you do need to do both. And so in order to do incremental innovations, I think Scott King did a talk on the Casual Games Conference in 2005. He said he had a talk where he would grab different games and explain this game is a combination of this game and this game. This game is a combination of this game and this game. And he went through the thought process of how he designs. He basically takes different mechanics and comes up with a new one, but he always bases his work on existing successful mechanics. It was a really good talk, and I don't even know if we have that archive. It was 12 years ago. But that was another reference of, most of the work that we do in game development is incremental innovation, and I think that's good. It's a good thing, because your audience is expecting to have some familiarity with the game before they actually play it.
Yeah, I actually did a talk called Incremental Innovations about an idle game I worked on with Jim Wagner back there earlier today. It's worth checking out in terms of some of the genre rules we wrote.
So I forget who mentioned, I think it might have been Steve at the beginning of the talk, talking about how Apple is going to stop actually publishing publicly those top grossing charts. Just as a designer and a developer, those charts are so core to what we look at for what is successful, what is not successful, what are we looking at. How do you see sort of the business of innovating and the business of knowing what is working is what's not working when the only sort of metric value of truth that we can all share is going to be sort of gone? Do you see that being replaced by something?
Well,
or as from a business standpoint?
For people in the business, the data is certainly pretty available. For example, through App Annie. I think the bigger change from that is the impact on the public at large no longer having access to that. And that's been such a huge part of, kind of launch strategy and the launch process, for years and years. And I think it remains to be seen. It's going to be fascinating to watch how that changes the process of launching mobile games.
I think, one of the challenges with any top chart, right, and we've seen this for as long as we've had sort of real-time data through online games, is if there's a metric, there's a way to game that metric if you're willing to do enough damage to your business. So we've certainly seen that on the mobile charts. We've seen it on the Facebook side. And that, I think, once some of those gameable metrics go away from the public eye, it'll be really interesting to see how we communicate with each other about the numbers.
I actually did an experiment. I asked 20 different people who were not in the game industry, where would they go in the App Store to download a new game? None of them pointed to the top grossing chart. None. So I personally feel that if Apple is removing the top grossing chart, it's because they know that no consumer actually uses it. We are using it, but we have a bunny at the end of the day, right? So I think we're going to be fine.
For what it's worth, I think they're also maintaining the data in their APIs, right? So sites like App Annie are still going to be around.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So, because we care.
Yeah, but it's a good question, though. Really good question. Thank you.
All right. Hey, Juan, Steve, Dave, thank you guys very much. I love it when you guys come and give a talk at Casual Connect. Thank you.